Now let's examine the second general problem of abusage, which I like to call the sounds-like syndrome. The sounds-like syndrome manifests itself when a word, usually one just a bit more refined than most people can handle, becomes confused with and then used as a pretentious substitute for another word that is similar in sound but different in meaning. If the error is repeated by enough people, often the result is that we lose one perfectly good word with a deserving role in the language and wind up with two words that mean the same thing. One, the common word that has quietly done its job all along, the other an ostentatious and officious upstart. In short, the sounds-like syndrome refers to pairs of words that are consistently confused because of their similar sound, with one word tending to eclipse the meaning of the other. Let me give you a few examples of these commonly confused words. As you hear them, ask yourself if you can distinguish their meanings. Fortuitous and fortunate. Apprise and appraise. Comprise and compose. Deprecate and depreciate. Enormity and enormousness. Precipitous and precipitate. And parameter and perimeter. All right, are you confused enough yet? In each example I read, the two words do not have the same or even a similar meaning. Yet every day one member of each pair is wrenched from its proper place in the language and forced to do the work of the other, as if it were a nut or bolt in a piece of machinery that could fit here or fit there and serve as well holding one part together as another. But words are not like nuts and bolts, mass-produced, nondescript, interchangeable. They are more like the people who use them, individual, distinct, and irreplaceable. Why do such confusions happen? First, because people make mistakes and appropriate the errors of others without realizing it. I am not a member of the school that maintains there is a conspiracy at work to corrupt the English language. No one is out there plotting to spread bad usage. What happens is that people hear or read something, and because they respect the person who said or wrote it, or they like the way it sounds, they think it must be right. Then they leave it at that, unaware that what they have just assimilated may be a solecism. As you may recall from the discussion in Level 6 of words derived from Greek, a solecism is a gross error of grammar or usage. The second reason these confusions happen may be attributed to human nature. Because people get bored using the same old words to say the same old things, and because they fear they will appear boring to others if they use the same old words everyone else uses, they start looking for novel ways to express themselves. This restless eagerness to impress others often leads people to substitute an ostensibly more elegant word for a familiar one, or to experiment with an unusual word they have not taken the trouble to learn. For example, they think, fortuitous looks like fortunate and sounds like fortunate, so it probably means pretty much the same thing. If we slip it in when we mean fortunate, we'll sound more intelligent and no harm done, right? I'm sorry, but that kind of logic just doesn't wash. The arbitrary substitution or appropriation of a word, whether intentional or not, almost always has a deleterious effect upon the language. Fortuitous means happening by chance, accidental, unexpected. Though we usually use fortuitous to refer to what the dictionaries like to call happy accidents, and though we rarely use it to refer to a chance event of an unfortunate nature, for instance, you wouldn't say a fortuitous earthquake, the fact remains that in precise usage, fortuitous is not interchangeable with fortunate. Allow me to give you an example that I think will illustrate the point. It's not unreasonable to infer from the phrase, a fortuitous meeting, that the meeting may be a fortunate or lucky one. But consider how the meaning of fortuitous becomes clear when I finish the sentence in this way. A fortuitous meeting with Mr. Percival Sneed was the cause of his death. There's no way you can use fortunate in that sentence unless you are trying to be droll. Now let's take a moment to distinguish the other pairs of words I mentioned earlier as examples of the sounds-like syndrome. Apprise and appraise. To apprise means to inform. To appraise means to evaluate or estimate the worth of. You apprise a coworker of what went on in the office while she was away. You appraise antiques, rare books, and works of art. Comprise and compose. As I noted way back in Level 2, comprise properly means to include, contain, or consist of. It should not be used to mean compose, which means to make up. The rule for comprise is that the whole comprises its parts. The parts compose the whole. Do not say the United States is comprised of 50 states, or that 50 states comprise the United States. Say the United States comprises 50 states, or the United States is composed of 50 states. Deprecate and depreciate. To deprecate means to express disapproval of. To depreciate means to belittle, disparage, lessen in value. When you deprecate something, you show your disapproval of it. A deprecating look is a disapproving look. When you depreciate something, you belittle it, treat it as inferior or of little value. A depreciating remark is a disparaging remark, one that shows a lack of appreciation for something. Enormity and enormousness. Many people erroneously use enormity to mean enormousness. Enormousness means the state or quality of being enormous, extremely large or great. We speak of the enormousness of the Rocky Mountains, or the enormousness of a project, not the enormity of them. Enormity refers to something morally outrageous or appalling, a monstrous evil or offense. We speak of the enormity of a crime, or the enormity of Adolf Hitler's diabolical final solution. Precipitous and precipitate. Precipitous means steep, like a precipice. Precipitate means rash, reckless, hasty, or sudden, abrupt, unexpected. The problem occurs when precipitous, steep, is used in place of precipitate, rash or abrupt, in such constructions as a precipitous decision to change jobs, or an escalating crisis heading precipitously toward war. A sudden or unexpected decision should be a precipitate decision. A crisis that moves with reckless haste toward conflict should head precipitately toward conflict. Use precipitous only when you mean steep. A steep rise in profits is a precipitous rise. A precipitous decline in unemployment is a steep decline. Parameter and perimeter. Most people who use parameter have no idea that it's an obscure mathematical term that has been pressed into service not only as a substitute for perimeter, which means a limit or boundary, but also as a pretentious synonym for characteristic and feature. And so today we hear and read such enormities of English prose as, "We have to work within certain parameters," and "the design has several new parameters," when clearly what is meant is that we have to work within a certain perimeter or within certain limits, and the design has several new features or characteristics. To me, the word parameter sounds extraterrestrial and ought to be shot on sight. To borrow a quip from the respected language authority Bergen Evans, who borrowed his quip from one of the greatest quipsters, Mark Twain, you could start building a very expressive vocabulary just by leaving parameter out. In closing this discussion of the sounds-like syndrome, I should note that if you look up these or other commonly confused words in a dictionary, you may find them listed as synonyms, often without comment. Don't be bamboozled by that. Their equation in the dictionary does not necessarily justify interchanging the words or substituting one for the other. It is simply a reflection of their continual misuse by people who are not aware that careful writers and speakers take pains to preserve their distinctions in meaning. Keep in mind that dictionaries, being descriptive rather than prescriptive documents, eventually will recognize common errors of usage, even though careful writers and speakers continue to eschew those errors and criticize them. And with that verbally advantageous admonishment, let's proceed with the next 10 keywords in Level 7. Word 21. Myrmidon. M-Y-R-M-I-D-O-N. A loyal follower, faithful servant or subordinate, especially someone who is unquestioningly obedient. Myrmidon may also be pronounced Myrmidon. In ancient Greek legend, the Myrmidons, spelled with a capital M, were a people of the region of Thessaly who fought in the Trojan War under their king, the great warrior Achilles. Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable notes that the Myrmidons were distinguished for their savage brutality, rude behavior, and thirst for rapine. Now there's an interesting word. Rapine, spelled R-A-P-I-N-E, means pillage, plunder, the act of seizing and carrying off property by force. The Oxford English Dictionary traces Myrmidon back to the year 1400 and shows that by the 17th century it had come to be used in a general sense to mean an unscrupulously faithful follower or hireling, a hired ruffian. The Myrmidons were perhaps in Alfred Lord Tennyson's mind when he composed the famous lines in his 1855 poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. In current usage, a Myrmidon, spelled with a small m, is a loyal follower or an obedient servant, a person who follows orders or executes. Word 22. Nascent. N-A-S-C-E-N-T. Beginning to exist or develop. In the process of being born or begun. Coming or having just come into being. Synonyms of nascent include emerging, dawning, developing, commencing, embryonic, incipient, and inchoate, which we will discuss later in this level. Antonyms include ancient, extinct, outworn, outmoded, antiquated, obsolete, senescent, word 9 of level 7, and antediluvian. Antediluvian, spelled A-N-T-E-D-I-L-U-V-I-A-N, means of the time before the deluge, the great flood described in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. Hence, extremely old or old-fashioned. The horse and buggy is an antediluvian mode of transportation. Bob's father still prefers to write on an antediluvian manual typewriter. There is nothing antediluvian about the word nascent, which comes from the Latin verb nasci, to be born. By derivation, nascent means in the process of being born, beginning to exist or develop. We speak of a nascent idea, a nascent republic, a nascent relationship, nascent anxiety, or nascent hope. The corresponding noun is nascency, which means birth or beginning. The year 1776 marks the nascency of American democracy. You may have heard nascent pronounced with a long A, nascent. Nascent has been listed as an alternative pronunciation in American dictionaries since the Word 23. Accede. A-C-C-E-D-E. To consent, yield, give in or agree to. Synonyms of accede include comply, submit, assent, concur, word 18 of level 1, and acquiesce, word 31 of level 4. Antonyms include resist, disagree, oppose, protest, contradict, dispute, dissent, wrangle, and cavil, word 29 of level 3. The verbs accede, acquiesce, assent, concur, and consent all suggest agreement. Consent implies voluntary agreement. You consent to another's wishes. Concur implies agreement reached independently. When you concur with a statement, you agree on your own without pressure from the person who made it. Assent implies agreement reached after careful consideration or deliberation. When you assent to a plan, you agree to it after discussion or careful thought. Acquiesce implies agreement offered despite tacit reservations. The person who acquiesces often is unwilling to agree but lacks the will or the energy to resist. Accede, our keyword, comes from the Latin accedere, to approach, come near. Accede implies agreement in which one person or party gives in to persuasion or yields under pressure. When you accede, you yield your position and give in to a demand or request, often under pressure. They acceded to the proposal on certain conditions. After renegotiating various points, we acceded to the terms of the contract. The union refused to. Word 24. Magnanimous. M-A-G-N-A-N-I-M-O-U-S. Noble, honorable, generous in overlooking injury or insult, high-minded, unselfish. People with an abiding faith in the goodness of human nature believe that we are noble, unselfish, and generous more often than we are ignoble, selfish, and grasping. The English vocabulary, however, suggests otherwise. In a language comprising well over 1 million words, there is a dearth of synonyms for magnanimous. Chalk up the words noble, honorable, generous, unselfish, and high-minded, and the list is almost exhausted. If you stretch things a bit, you can add courageous, exalted, and lofty for the noble, high-minded connotation of magnanimous, and charitable, altruistic, and beneficent for the generous, unselfish connotation. On the other hand, the language abounds with antonyms for magnanimous. Browse through any thesaurus and you will find a cornucopia of these ignoble, selfish words. Here is a selection of my favorites: vile, contemptible, malicious, despicable, ignominious, covetous, avaricious, word 40 of level 2, mercenary, word 14 of level 3, venal, vindictive, word 39 of level 5, churlish, sordid, abject, servile, sycophantic, and finally, because we can't go on with this forever, we have the utterly ignoble word pusillanimous, which means cowardly, weak, and mean-spirited. We will discuss pusillanimous further in level 9. The noble word magnanimous comes from the Latin magnus, great, and animus, spirit, and means literally great-spirited. In modern usage, magnanimous means having or displaying a noble and generous soul, specifically showing noble generosity in overlooking injury or insult. It applies either to persons who possess a generous, lofty, and courageous spirit, or to persons or actions that are unselfish, high-minded, and free from pettiness or vindictiveness. Noble and magnanimous are close in meaning. According to the Century Dictionary, noble expresses that which in character and conduct is appropriate to exalted place, and admits no degree of the petty, mean, base, or dishonorable. Magnanimous describes that largeness of mind that has breadth enough and height enough to take in large views, broad sympathies, and exalted standards. It generally implies superiority of position, as a nation so great as the United States can afford to be magnanimous in its treatment of injuries or affronts from nations comparatively weak. The corresponding noun is magnanimity, noble generosity, greatness or dignity of mind or heart. He is a man of such magnanimity that he will do everything in his power to aid a worthy cause, no matter how unpopular it may be. Word 25. Nonage. Nonage. Immaturity, youth, especially the period of legal minority, the state of being a minor in the eyes of the law. Nonage comes through Middle English from Anglo-French, the language of the Normans, who conquered England in 1066. Nonage combines the prefix non, meaning not, with the word age, to mean literally not of age. Nonage may be used either generally to refer to any period of immaturity, or specifically to mean the state of being a minor. People in their nonage are under the lawful age for doing certain things, such as marrying, making contracts, driving a motor vehicle, voting, or buying alcoholic. Word 26. Invective. Invective. Vehement or abusive language involving bitter, scathing accusations or denunciations. Synonyms of invective include slander, defamation, aspersion, objurgation, word 12 of level 7, billingsgate, vituperation, and obloquy. Antonyms of invective include praise, commendation, adulation, eulogy, and encomium. EncomIum. Let's take a closer look at the words billingsgate, vituperation, and obloquy, which, like invective, denote various forms of abusive language. Billingsgate comes from the name of one of the ancient gates of the city of London, near which stood a fish market. Apparently, not only did this market smell foul, as fish markets often do, but legend has it that the vendors and patrons also stunk up the place by exhibiting a proclivity for foul language. From those foul beginnings, billingsgate has come to mean abusive language that is filthy and obscene. The word vituperation has no such odorous etymology. Vituperation comes from a Latin verb meaning to scold or blame, and today denotes either a prolonged and vicious scolding or harsh, abusive language that violently scolds or blames. Obloquy, spelled obloquy, comes from the Latin ob, meaning against, and loqui, to speak. Obloquy refers to abusive language, and particularly abusive speech, whose express purpose is to defame or disgrace. If someone tries to ruin your reputation by abusing you either in conversation or in print, that's obloquy. And when obloquy strikes, you can react with equanimity, which you will recall means composure, calm indifference, or you can respond with invective, bitter, vehement accusations or denunciations. In Synonyms Discriminated, published in 1879, Charles Johnson Smith explains that abuse is personal and coarse, being conveyed in harsh and unseemly terms, and dictated by angry feeling and bitter temper. Invective is more commonly aimed at character or conduct, and may be conveyed in writing and in refined language, and dictated by indignation against what is in itself blameworthy. It often, however, means public abuse under such restraints as are imposed by position and education. More than 100 years later, Smith's distinction still holds. When someone uses coarse, harsh, or obscene language to disparage or intimidate another, we call it verbal abuse. When the abuse occurs in a public context and takes the form of a bitter, vehement verbal attack that remains just barely within the bounds of decency, we call it invective. Thus, today we speak of a newspaper editorial full of invective. The invective exchanged in a bitter political contest. A snubbed author hurling invective at his critics. Or an opinionated radio talk show host who issues a stream of invective against his ideological foes. Invective comes ultimately from the Latin verb invehere, which means to attack with words. From the same source comes the English verb to inveigh, spelled I-N-V-E-I-G-H. Like its Latin ancestor, to inveigh means to attack violently with words, protest furiously, or express angry disapproval. Inveigh is always followed by against, as to inveigh against authority, to inveigh against an unfair company policy, to inveigh against an abuse of First Amendment rights. Word 27. Machination. M-A-C-H-I-N-A-T-I-O-N. A crafty or treacherous plot, malicious scheme, cunning design or plan to achieve a sinister purpose. Synonyms of machination include stratagem, conspiracy, contrivance, ruse, and cabal. C-A-B-A-L. Machination comes from the Latin verb machinari, to plot, devise, contrive to do evil, which comes in turn from the noun machina, a device or contrivance for performing work. From the sound of the Latin machina and its spelling, M-A-C-H-I-N-A, it's easy to deduce that it is also the source of the familiar and versatile word machine, something devised to perform work. The Latin machina also appears in a phrase that has been taken whole into English, Deus ex machina, which means literally a god out of a machine. In his delightful book, Amo Amas Amat, How to Use Latin to Your Own Advantage and to the Astonishment of Others, Eugene Ehrlich translates Deus ex machina as an unlikely and providential intervention, and explains that the phrase describes an unexpected occurrence that rescues someone or something from an apparently hopeless predicament. Although Deus ex machina is Latin, Ehrlich tells us that the expression has its origin in ancient Greek theater. When the complexities of plot and character appeared incapable of resolution, a god was set down on stage by a mechanical crane to sort out things and make them right. Our keyword, machination, means a crafty plot, malicious scheme, cunning plan to achieve a sinister purpose, as a machination to seize power. In current usage, the singular form is less common than the plural, machinations. Ralph's deviousness enabled him to climb the company ladder, but when his machinations finally were exposed, he found himself demoted to the mailroom. You might think that machinations are confined to the crafty worlds of business and politics, and to the sinister arena of international espionage, but the word is also sometimes used in a literary or metaphorical way, in such phrases as the machinations of love, which can often be a treacherous business, or the machinations of our dreams, which are often devious, or the machinations of destiny, which may seem to plot against us. I shall conclude this crafty lesson with an important pronunciation tip. Certain educated speakers, probably misled by the sound of the CH in machine, have adopted the pronunciation machination. This beastly machination is a classic example of what happens when people learn the meaning of a word but don't bother to check the pronunciation in a dictionary. They simply looked at machination, saw the word machine inside, and decided to say machination, blithely assuming that their false analogy was right, without pausing to consider that the pronunciation they have just invented might not be the one most educated speakers prefer. That, in a nutshell, is how eccentric pronunciations are born. And the worst thing about it is that the mispronouncers often flaunt their inventions, as if to show that they have placed their personal stamp on the language by making up a bizarre way to say a word. Some dictionaries now recognize machination, but list it after the preferred pronunciation, in which the CH is pronounced like K, machination. Word 28. Docile. Docile. Submissive. Obedient. Compliant. Easy to direct, manage, or supervise. Following instructions. Synonyms of docile include amenable, deferential, malleable, word 29 of level 2, tractable, acquiescent, and obsequious, word 3 of level 7. Antonyms include willful, wayward, headstrong, obstinate, word 34 of level 1, intractable, word 12 of level 5, intransigent, and refractory, word 42 of level 6. Docile comes through the Latin docilus, teachable, from docere, to teach, instruct. From the same source comes the word docent, spelled D-O-C-E-N-T. A docent is either a teacher at a university who is not a member of the faculty, or a lecturing tour guide in a museum, cathedral, or some such place of cultural interest. By the way, in your travels through museums and the like, you may hear the phrase docent guide, which is redundant. A docent guide is a guide, because docent means a guide trained to lecture on what is being viewed. Think of me as your docent in the Museum of the English Language. Our keyword, docile, by derivation means teachable. In modern usage, docile has two closely related senses. It may mean easy to teach or instruct, as a docile pupil, or it may mean submissive, obedient, as a docile pet or a docile employee, which is not to imply that employees in general are analogous to pets, but only that some employees are docile, easy to direct, manage, or supervise. The corresponding noun is docility. A dictatorship or totalitarian state derives its power only from the docility of the people. Occasionally, you may hear docile pronounced docile. Docile is the preference of British and Canadian speakers. The preferred American pronunciation is docile. Word 29. Redoubtable. R-E-D-O-U-B-T-A-B-L-E. Formidable. Fearsome. Arousing awe or dread. Hence, worthy of or commanding respect. Redoubtable comes through Middle English from an Old French verb meaning to fear or dread, and ultimately from the Latin dubitare, to doubt, waver in opinion or action. The source also of the words dubious, which means doubtful or questionable, and dubiety, which means doubtfulness, uncertainty, wavering. Perhaps because the things we find dubious or that make us waver are often the same things we find disturbing or frightening, the word redoubtable has come to apply to that which we fear and respect because we doubt our ability to match, oppose, or overcome it. In modern usage, redoubtable means fearsome, formidable, commanding respect, and may apply either to people or things. We speak of the legendary Hercules as a redoubtable hero, of drug abuse as a redoubtable social problem, of AIDS as a redoubtable disease, of the redoubtable genius of Albert Einstein, of a rivalry between two redoubtable football teams, or of small airline companies facing redoubtable competition from the big carriers. In current usage, redoubtable sometimes is used to achieve a humorous, gently mocking effect. For example, back when Johnny Carson was host of The Tonight Show, on which the actress Shelley Winters was a frequent guest, I remember Carson once cut to a commercial with this quip: "Don't go away because we'll be right back. Word 30. Prognosticate. Prognosticate. To predict, especially to predict from signs, symptoms, or present indications." Synonyms of prognosticate include foretell, forecast, foresee, prophesy, presage, and vaticinate. Vaticinate. Prognosticate comes through Latin from Greek, and by derivation means a knowing beforehand, foreknowledge. From the same source, we inherit several related words. Prognostic, used as a noun, means an indication of something in the future. Used as an adjective, prognostic means pertaining to or serving as the basis of a prediction, as prognostic powers or prognostic evidence. The noun prognostication means a prediction, prophecy, forecast, as the prognostications of economists are not always reliable. Prognosticator is a lofty word for a person who makes predictions. If you want to be grandiloquent, you could say the reporter who does your local weather forecast is a prognosticator, or that a coworker who is always making predictions about affairs in the office is the office prognosticator. Finally, the useful noun prognosis, spelled Prognosis, means a prediction of the probable course and outcome of a disease or medical condition. The words prognosis and diagnosis should be sharply distinguished. A diagnosis is an assessment of a medical condition. When you ask your doctor, "What's the diagnosis?" you are asking for the doctor's opinion of what is wrong based on a clinical analysis of signs and symptoms. When you ask your doctor, "What's the prognosis?" you are asking the doctor to predict the likely course and outcome of the condition based on whatever treatment is administered. In other words, to tell you whether the problem will get better or worse. In short, a diagnosis describes the nature of the medical condition. A prognosis predicts its likely course and outcome. Our keyword, prognosticate, means to make a prognosis or prediction. Prognosticate applies especially to the act of predicting from signs, symptoms, or present indications. Political pundits attempt to prognosticate the outcome of an election. Financial analysts prognosticate trends in the stock market. Your horoscope in the newspaper purports to prognosticate from the alignment of the planets what may lie in store for you that day.
Let's review the 10 key words you've just learned. This time, I'm going to give you 2 words, and you decide if they are synonyms or antonyms. Are you ready? Here we go. Antagonist and myrmidon are antonyms. An antagonist is an opponent. A myrmidon is a loyal follower, faithful servant or subordinate. Nascent and senescent are antonyms. Senescent means aging, growing old. Nascent means beginning to exist or develop, in the process of being born or coming into being. To accede and to consent are Synonyms. Accede means to consent, yield, give in or agree to. Ignominious and magnanimous are antonyms. Ignominious means shameful, dishonorable, contemptible. Magnanimous means noble, honorable, high-minded, unselfish, generous in overlooking injury or insult. Nonage and immaturity are synonyms. Nonage means immaturity, youth, especially the state of being a minor in the eyes of the law. Commendation and invective are antonyms. Invective is vehement or abusive language involving bitter, scathing accusations or denunciations. Plot and machination are synonyms. A machination is a crafty or treacherous plot, malicious scheme, cunning plan to achieve a sinister purpose. Intractable and docile are antonyms. Intractable means hard to manage or control. Docile means submissive, obedient, compliant, easy to direct, manage, or supervise. Formidable and redoubtable are synonyms. Redoubtable means formidable, fearsome, worthy of or commanding respect. To prognosticate and to predict are synonyms. To prognosticate means to predict from signs, symptoms, or present indications. That concludes the review for this section. If you answered fewer than 8 of the questions correctly in this quiz, remember to listen to the keyword discussions again before moving ahead in the program.
Now let's discuss the third category of abusage, Vogue words. By Vogue words, I mean words that for some reason suddenly become fashionable, and that people use constantly without considering whether they have any useful purpose or force. Vogue words may be old or new, long or short, but the one thing they have in common is their popularity, which leads to their being worn out by excessive and mechanical repetition, as Wilson Follett puts it in modern American usage. In short, Vogue words are the words that lazy writers and speakers reach for when they are trying to sound intelligent and original, but don't have anything interesting to say. As you may recall from my tirade in Level 5, unique is a prime example of a Vogue word. Have you noticed how everything is so very unique these days? Apparently, the time has passed when something was just unusual or uncommon. To top it off, the precise meaning of unique is not simply unusual or uncommon, but one of a kind, matchless, without peer. Once you know that, it doesn't make sense to qualify unique with such words as very, most, or somewhat. How can something be very unique or somewhat unique if it already is peerless, one of a kind? You may also recall from the end of Level 6 my objurgation regarding the Vogue word impact. In The Writer's Art, James J. Kilpatrick says impact has fastened like fatty tissue to the arteries of our language. He's right. No longer can something have a plain effect. It must have a dull impact. No longer can we say that something influenced or affected us. The banal vogue demands we say it impacted us. In my vocabulary, your teeth or your bones can be impacted, wedged together. And an impact is a collision or violent blow. But those who follow the vogue have taken all the force out of this word and used it as a feeble substitute for influence or effect. Today we are bombarded with environmental impact studies, warnings about the impact of inflation, and vicissitudes that may adversely impact the stock market. As if that's not enough to make a verbally advantaged person contemplate the impact of a bullet on the brain, the impact virus now is mutating into even more pernicious forms. Recently, I have come across the word impactful in print. For instance, in an ad for a laptop computer that said, "Presentations are impactful, engaging, impressive." Why did that tin-eared writer use impactful? What's wrong with saying the presentations are engaging and impressive? Or for that matter, effective, outstanding, striking, splendid, gripping, stunning, sensational, or electrifying? Why invent such an ugly word when so many attractive ones are available? Please, dear listener, for the health and welfare of the English language, I implore you to abstain from using impact or any of its odious offspring. Our next vile Vogue word is viable. The precise meaning of viable is able to live, able to take root and grow, capable of independent existence, as a viable plant, a viable fetus, a viable culture, or a viable industry. Today, however, people are using viable to mean possible, workable, doable. When I hear about viable plans and viable alternatives, I wonder where they're going to live, who's going to put them up. If you want a fancy word for possible, try conceivable. And if you want a fancy word for workable or doable, try practicable. That's 4 syllables, practicable, spelled Practicable. Next in the top 40 of Vogue, we have the Eyes brothers. Maximize, finalize, prioritize, concretize, sensitize, optimize, secretize, incentivize, and many more awkward and pretentious verbs ending in IZE. In the appropriate word, J.N. Hook notes that eyes is an unbeautiful verb ending, often criticized by writers on usage, yet frequently necessary, as criticize itself illustrates. In The Careful Writer, Theodore Bernstein wisely comments that the suffix eyes can either help the language grow in a wholesome way, or it can make it grow stuffy and grotesque. Criticize, sterilize, socialize, and hospitalize are useful because they streamline expression. A coinage like incentivize is not only ugly and outlandish, but also unnecessary, because the language already contains words that express its meaning, such as excite, encourage, and stimulate. Remember, if you hear a strange buzzing in your ears, watch out for a pompous and promiscuous use of the suffix eyes. According to devotees of the Vogue, people don't talk, speak, or converse anymore. Instead, they dialogue, as we dialogued about it for an hour over lunch. I'm sorry, but it's high time to put a muzzle on that one. Other horrifying Vogue words include interface, which should not be allowed to show its face outside of computer science, methodology, used to mean method, decisioned, used to mean decided, and proactive, which the dictionaries now tell us means acting in anticipation of something, but which the Voguesters in business and government all seem to use either to mean acting to show that we're acting, or acting as if we know what we're doing. The poet W.H. Auden once claimed that 9/10 of the population do not know what 30% of the words they use actually mean. I would wager that most people use words like impact, prioritize, methodology, and proactive not because they're trying to use the right word, but because they're trying to appear with it or smart. As H.W. Fowler remarks in his classic guide, Modern English Usage, Vogue words are words owing their vogue to the joy of showing one has acquired them. Finally, there are the catchphrases that are so often repeated that they lose whatever shred of meaning or force they might have had. Think about how often you have heard, and probably used, these phrases. Calculated risk, cautiously optimistic, credibility gap, communication gap, the bottom line, a quantum leap, phase out, cutting edge, state of the art, meaningful dialogue, peer group, considered judgment, factors to be considered, decision-making process, learning experience, positive consequences, it remains to be seen, and in regard to, or worse, the illiterate in regards to. Those are just a handful of the scores of fashionable but vapid or nebulous expressions that the careful writer and speaker rephrases or avoids. Keep your eyes and ears open, and whenever you suspect that a word or phrase is becoming weak from overwork, it's a good bet that it's been bitten by the Vogue. In The Writer's Art, James J. Kilpatrick relates an anecdote about former Secretary of Commerce Malcolm Baldrige, who was so infuriated with the gobbledygook and doublespeak of the Washington bureaucracy that he issued a memo demanding short sentences and short words with emphasis on plain English, using no more words than effective expression requires. Thus, for starters, writes Kilpatrick, Baldrige banned from departmental correspondence and papers such words as maximize, institutionalize, and interface, along with such phrases as bottom line, serious crisis, and material enclosed herewith. I can just see all the bureaucrats interfacing and dialoguing around the coffee maker, being cautiously optimistic about maximizing their bottom line. Somebody had to impact their parameters, right? There are two lessons to be learned here. Look hard before you leap on the verbal bandwagon, and beware the ostentatious allure of the popular but enervated word. As Wilson Follett writes in Modern American Usage, when repeated use has worn down the novelty, the word we hear and the associations we sense are not what they were at first. Skill in expression consists in nothing else than choosing the fittest among all possible words, idioms, and constructions. And with that fitting piece of advice on Vogue Words, let's return now to the Verbal Advantage vocabulary for the next